In the post-Revolutionary War period, the United States became a maritime power. That was how our economy was based. If you owned a ship, you stuffed that ship full of everything that America had to offer in terms of lumber and iron and fish and beef and pork and cotton, tobacco especially. You sailed that boat to Europe where you sold it all off for a lot more than you paid to buy it in America. You then turned around, took that money, and bought silks and linens and porcelain and glass and everything that the new nation of the United States still wasn't manufacturing. And you brought that back to the United States, and you doubled, tripled, sometimes quadrupled your profit. And the government made its money by charging import duty. In the late 18th century, England had the biggest, most powerful navy on the planet. When the United States declared its independence from Great Britain, one of the things that we lost was the Union Jack flying from our ships. So when we became independent, we had our own flag flying, and it was basically a signal to any country that thought we could make a quick profit by seizing these boats and holding the crews for ransom and selling off the cargo and demanding money for peace treaties. And that's exactly what began to happen almost immediately after the end of the Revolutionary War. The nations that today we call the Barbary States, Morocco, which was an independent country at the time, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, they controlled the entrance to the Mediterranean. And as American ships went through, you either paid the protection money or they attacked the boats, and the owners and the government lost whatever money might have been tied up in those boats. One example is Salem, Massachusetts, which was a very famous maritime city. In 1 month, Salem contributed $686,000 in import taxes to the federal government. In terms of modern money, you're probably talking about $2 to $3 billion. In 1794, Algiers decided that we weren't giving them enough money. Piracy, or the threat of piracy, is what fueled the economies of the Barbary States. They were poor backwater provinces of the Ottoman Empire, and they needed some way to stimulate their economy. By 1800, the Barbary pirates, their demands for more and more and more money had reached a point that everybody in the United States wanted to do something about it. In April 1801, the Prince of Tripoli sent an ultimatum to President Thomas Jefferson, in which he told the president either he pays more than he gives to both Tunis and Algiers, or Tripoli would declare war in the United States. Jefferson sent back a very curt, short note that told the Prince of Tripoli to take a long walk off a short pier. The Prince of Tripoli thereupon rode his black charger onto the grounds of the United States consulate in Tripoli, and he cut down the American flag on the flagpole. And it was symbolic of declaring war because wood was so scarce in a desert country like Tripoli. And that played right into Thomas Jefferson's hands. Thomas Jefferson, from the time that he had served as a diplomat in Spain and France, wanted to find a way to attack and defeat the Barbary pirates. As early as 1786, he had come up with the idea of a coalition of the willing, and that was exactly what he called it, of nations that were paying tribute to the Barbary States. What Jefferson envisioned was sending our navy to Tripoli and inflicting such damage on the Prince of Tripoli that he would never again dare to send out his corsairs to attack our vessels. So in 1801, he ordered Commodore Richard Dale to take the Constellation and 5 other vessels to the Mediterranean to take on the Barbary pirates. He was a young, vital commander in the Revolution. But by 1801, he was in his 40s. He was much more of a merchant boat captain by then than he was a naval commander. And all Dale really managed to accomplish was to bring American warships to the Mediterranean. He never really established a real blockade. He never tried to attack the city of Tripoli. Jefferson realized this. He recalled Dale, and in 1802, he sent Commodore Richard Morris to take command of the Mediterranean squadron in the blockade of Tripoli. And he did even less than Dale. He essentially went on tour. It allowed his wife, who accompanied him on the voyage, to see many of the famous places in Europe. It was a cruise with a semi-purpose. After the first two commanders had failed miserably before Tripoli, Jefferson was looking for someone who was known to be aggressive. He was looking for someone who was known to be able to discipline officers and men. In 1803, Jefferson turned to Edward Preble to take command of the Mediterranean squadron. He was one of the first officers appointed to the Navy when it was created in 1794. To Preble, the most important thing that he could do was to prove the worth of the United States Navy to both the American people and to everyone abroad. He kept his ship on a constant war footing. He drilled his men every day until Constitution was so well prepared for combat that he was ready to take on a boat much larger than his own. He gave birth to the modern officer corps of the United States Navy and Marine Corps. Preble arrived off of Tripoli, and he ordered 2 warships to remain there. And he was going to do what no other commander had ever done. He was going to maintain a blockade right through the winter. Wintertime in the Mediterranean was not a time you wanted to be out in a sailboat doing much of anything. And yet he intended to establish this blockade. And he decided to use the frigate Philadelphia, which was considered at that time to be the best sailing warship then afloat, who was commanded by Captain William Bainbridge. On Halloween Day, 1803, William Bainbridge chased this pirate boat that he saw. He didn't know the harbor. He didn't have a pilot. And just as they were about to get into gun range, there was a gut-wrenching shudder, followed by a scream, followed by a croaking sound. The Philadelphia had run aground. Bainbridge put her smack onto a reef. Finally, Bainbridge decided there was only one recourse, and he surrendered. And he handed the Prince of Tripoli 305 American hostages. Preble tried to figure out a way, how do I get Philadelphia back? 2 of his officers, Charles Stewart and Stephen Decatur, however, came to him on the same day with almost an identical plan. The idea was to take an American boat, disguise it as an Arab vessel, sneak into the harbor, board the Philadelphia, and destroy it. Preble loved the idea. He also had an ace in the hole, and that was a little boat called the Intrepid, the first USS Intrepid in the United States Navy, which was actually a captured Arab merchant boat. So the Intrepid set out from Sicily, and on the night of February 16th, the little Intrepid sailed into Tripoli harbor, and she made her way toward the Philadelphia. And just as the Intrepid was about to tie up, the guards suddenly realized something was wrong, and somebody yelled Americans. And that's when Decatur yelled board. And his 75 men rushed onto the Philadelphia. They overwhelmed the guards that were on the Philadelphia, either killing them or driving them overboard. And in a space of 15 minutes, they had planted all the combustibles that they needed to set the Philadelphia on fire to make their escape. As they did so, certainly secrecy was lost. The alarm was sounded. The Tripolitan defenders knew there was an American boat next to the Philadelphia, and they all opened up on the little Intrepid. The fact that Decatur had sailed this boat in undetected, destroyed a great warship under the nose of 115 cannon. He didn't lose a man. The crew of the Philadelphia were thrown in prison, where they were made into slave labor for the Prince of Tripoli. And they remained in this prison until 1805, when, to the shock of Edward Preble, President Jefferson decided to agree to pay for peace with Tripoli. In 1805, Jefferson decided to back the brother of the man on the throne of Tripoli. He allowed a an adventurer named William Eaton to raise an army to support the prince's brother and to put the brother on the throne. And that kind of overshadowed what Preble did. And we have to think in 1804, even though for 100 years the exploits of Preble and Decatur and Somers and Stewart were celebrated, cities were named after all of these men. Children were taught to emulate these men. Then World War I happened. Then the Great Depression happened. And then World War II came. And the epic nature of these three events really overshadowed everything, and the Barbary War simply became a footnote in American history.